Youth suicide is a growing problem. In recent years, it's overtaken road crashes as the #1 killer of young Queenslanders under the age of 24. But among Indigenous children, the rate is ringing alarm bells. Almost half of all children who commit suicide are Indigenous, despite making up just 4% of the population.
In the Daly River region, 200 kilometres southwest of Darwin, where more than 10 people have taken their lives over 7 years, elders are taking action.
It affects everybody, and very deeply so, especially if you're in a small community as Nauyu.
The former Nauyu school principal has set up a community group to prevent suicide, bringing families and health professionals together to learn how to recognise the warning signs and to offer support.
With smoking ceremonies to cleanse, this camp is drawing on more than 40,000 years of history to heal 9 troubled youths, including 15-year-old Cameron.
My mum, she kind of made me angry. She just don't feel like she loves me anymore. That's how I feel.
What do you do with that anger?
Smoke drugs, do bad things.
All but one of these adolescents have thought of committing suicide and are recovering from drug and alcohol addictions.
So there you go about some videos from YouTube. It tackles about young Indigenous people who commit suicide. So obviously, my report is about the prevalence of suicide among adolescent Indigenous people related to some mental disorders. So I'm Sheila Antilio Verde Manzano. I'm a third-year student of Bachelor of Nursing in University of Canberra. So my topic is about the accelerating rate of suicide among Indigenous people, which is related to some mental disorders. I'm quite surprised because I didn't know that here in Australia the suicidal rate is very high, and especially in Indigenous youth people. So for me, adolescence is one of the important stage of life of one person. You can establish the stage here of being positive in health and social behavior. But unluckily, Indigenous people, young ones, are the most unsafe receiver of negative impact of mental disorders that lead them to commit suicide. So the scope of my report is about the introduction, definition of suicide, characteristic of adolescents, Indigenous people, some mental disorders that lead to suicide, other contributing factors, government programs and management, and the list of my references. So first, according to Australian Bureau of Statistics in 2015, between 2008 to 2012, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people almost doubled the suicide rate of non-Indigenous Australians. According also to Australian Institute of Health and Welfare in 2014, Indigenous female youth suicide rates recorded 5.9 times higher, and for males is 4.4 times higher. So several incidents happened in remote areas and revealed that their rates were much higher for the age group of 25 to 34 years old, which is reported by Steering Committee for Review of Government Service Provision in 2014. So definitely it's alarming rate for the government of Australia. So for my second slide, what is suicide? The definition of suicide according to Masango, Ratamena, and Montechesi in 2008, which can be found in page 25, suicide can be defined as intentional self-inflicted death. So as you can see in my slide, I have 3 different ways on how to commit suicide. First is the cutting their wrist. Second is hanging themselves, and some of them choose to jump from higher ground or from cliff. If I'm not mistaken, this week I've attended my tutorial in my mental subject, and we tackle about the suicide of young indigenous people, and a young man from Perth, an indigenous young man who is only 20 years old, committed a suicide by hanging himself in a tree. So it's a little bit, actually rather it's a tragic event or moment for his family. So for my third slide is, what are the characteristics of adolescent indigenous people in Australia? Mostly, of course, they're 15 to 19 years old. They are more vulnerable in some mental disorders that lead them to commit suicide. So there are some mental disorders that connected to suicide of adolescent indigenous people. We have the number one mental illness as depression, trauma, and anxiety. Unfortunately, when I'm looking for any statistics about the depression in indigenous youth people and also in trauma and anxiety, I can't find anything, so that's a little bit tricky. But most of them provide the suicide rate for adolescent indigenous people. So, we can discuss depression. Depression is a commonly occurring serious recurrent disorder linked to diminished role functioning and quality of life. It could be medical morbidity and mortality, according to Kessler and Bromet in 2013, which can be seen in page 119. So we have some contributing factors in depression of indigenous youth people that leads to suicide. There are racism, unemployment, poverty, depression of a family member or friend, having a family member or a friend who attempt or die by suicide. Actually, racism is the number one cause of depression among indigenous youth people. And also the last two factors are playing a majority role why some of indigenous youth people are depressed, or some of them are just to die by committing suicide or suicide attempt. So for the fifth slide, you can see the pictures of contributing factors in depression. There's one indigenous young man who is depressed, who needs work, who lives in poverty, and two young lady who changed their face to what you call this, to fight for racism. So the second one is trauma. Trauma is an emotional state of discomfort and stress resulting from memories of an extraordinary, catastrophic experience which shattered the survivor's sense of invulnerability to harm. It's according to Figley in 2013 in page 18. There are also different determinants in traumatized adolescent indigenous people in committing suicide, unlike traumatic family events and experiences such as family breakdown, substance abuse, sexual assault, and conflict and relationship failure, and have also historical trauma. One of the example about having trauma to adolescent indigenous people is their relationship to their partners or to their boyfriend or girlfriends. One YouTube videos provide provide one example that one young girl who fought from his boyfriend commits suicide. So it's literally a big problem for indigenous youth people for having the relationship failure. So based in historical trauma, if I'm not mistaken, they have the trauma because of stolen generations, and also the culture shock, which different from the aboriginal culture to white cultures when during the white invasion. So the third one is anxiety, as cited in Underman and Campbell in 2007, page 74. According to Campbell, 2004, Anxiety can be described as a response to a threat or a feeling of uneasiness whose source is uncertain or vague. There are several stressors in indigenous youth people to engage in suicide from anxiety. There is the socioeconomic and social issues, ongoing anger, loss, and grief. So I presume that loss and grief is related to stolen generation, and poverty is related or connected to socioeconomic and social issues here in Australia. So we have also the barriers that affects to seek help for mental services in Australia by adolescent indigenous people. There are lack of trust in mainstream services. Basically, some of them, or rather majority of them, is uneducated. Second is misunderstanding caused by cultural and language differences. So language barriers is also a major key, which become a hindrance to seek for help regarding to their mental health status. And the third one is inadequate measures to reduce the stigma associated with mental illnesses that can lead to suicide. The government programs and management also been established, and we have the MHFF, or Mental Health First Aid, which developed in 2001 in response to poor literacy about mental health status. It also focuses into the providing culturally appropriate first aid to indigenous youth people. Second one, we have ATAPS, or Access to Allied Psychological Services. This services was enhanced by the government in supplementing a mental health reform package, which also focuses in the prevention of suicide among indigenous people. We have also Beyond Blue, creates a national focus for community education, prevention, and treatment of depression. They're more active in social media. And in 2011, they expressed the concerns in youth indigenous people in rural communities. And these are the list of my references. So, in summary, for me, solving the problem about suicide of Aboriginal Strait Islander and Torres Strait and Pacific Islander youth people have a long way to go, but the government of Australia should continue to reforms their programs and education for the indigenous people, especially the youth. So I think the best and the number one resort is to reduce this stigma and respect them, because it's really important for every person to receive respect, so the member of the indigenous people can be more open about the can be more open about the objectives and the goals of Australian government. So that's it. Thank you very much.